stand and the crisis our industry is facing. Some very real examples of the impact of our industry include drilling stopped at Hibernia and the tieback postponed, Hibernia-related exploration cut short, West White Rose construction and first oil put off for a year, CNOC drilling campaign delayed, Terra Nova asset life extension on hold, 2 drill rigs, West Aquarius and Transocean Barents, leaving our waters, temporary closure of North Atlantic refining and postponement of upgrades, and Baden Nord deferred. There are rumors of much more to come, including other potential exploration campaign delays or cancellations. Further, I know the number of layoffs and job losses to hit our industry are more than rumors. They are very difficult realities for thousands of families in Newfoundland and Labrador. As those of you in attendance know, Noia continues to advocate on behalf of our members and our province for an assistance package from the federal government specific to our offshore. I feel discussions have gone on long enough and we need immediate action. We believe Minister O'Regan, our representative in the federal cabinet, is working hard on our behalf. We have an open line of communication with him and his staff. However, he needs all the help we can provide in making a case to his colleagues for why our industry should be supported. Our asks are not huge and they are not unprecedented. We are not seeking a bailout, but assistance to prevent a massive bailout of our province in the very near future. We are asking for incentives for exploration to help our industry compete globally with jurisdictions such as Norway, the UK, and Australia, who are offering such incentives to attract investment and keep their industries alive. We also need incentives to keep development projects moving forward for the benefit of the supply chain and the thousands of people who have lost employment. Again, these are not unprecedented asks and have been used in our offshore before with great success. I'm looking forward to hearing the thoughts of our distinguished panel members about the current circumstances of our industry. There is tremendous knowledge on this panel today, and on behalf of our members and the board of directors, I thank each panelist for agreeing to take part. Now I ask Bill Fanning, President and Country Manager of Coverner Canada, to take us through the town hall. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin our panel discussion, I would like to thank everyone for their attendance and inform you that you may submit questions to the panel using the Q&A function of Zoom. The Q&A icon is located on the bottom of your screen. Should you have a question for a specific panelist or all panelists, please write it there. Also, a brief note to the media, a recording of today's town hall will be made available shortly after we conclude. So let's start, and let me recap from Town Hall number 1, which took place a little over 2 weeks ago. Building on Noia's hashtag #MyOffshoreMyFuture, on April 27th, we heard from various leaders in our province representing oil and gas, tourism, real estate, young adult cancer, transportation, and logistics. They each talked about the profound impact our offshore oil and gas industry has had on our province, the thousands of direct employment, and the significant ripple effect throughout our economy, preserving and enhancing the overall well-being of our society, and of course, the economic and social benefits of our industry are felt right across Canada. We also heard that notwithstanding COVID-19 and a low oil price, our story is far from over. We have what the world needs as we transition to a low-carbon future, but we can't do it alone. To continue to be globally competitive and attract capital investment, we urgently need a fiscal stimulus from the federal government. Not a handout, a stimulus to drive exploration and get development projects moving. Today, we continue that conversation, but with a greater sense of urgency. We have an outstanding and diverse panel of business leaders and entrepreneurs, a couple who have spent considerable time in public office. So let's start. I would like to introduce the Honorable Brian Tobin. Brian was Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador from 1996 to 2000, and also served in the federal cabinet as Minister of Industry and Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. He is a member of the Order of Canada, served on several boards, and as a former CEO. Brian is currently Vice Chair of BMO Financial Group and has served on several corporate boards. floor is yours, Brian.
Thank you very much, Bill. And Bill, let me say I'm delighted to be here with such a distinguished panelist group, Fred and Mark, and of course yourself and Charlene, and together with Karen. There are so many issues that confront Newfoundland and Labrador today. It'd be tempting to start talking about some of them, but that would be a mistake given the focus today is on oil and gas. And so I'll try and restrain myself to comments just on oil and gas. But before I do, I do want to acknowledge the tremendous leadership the province has had in dealing with COVID-19. And I want to, in particular, note the fact that Premier Ball, Mr. Crosby, and Ms. Coffin have all worked together in an nonpartisan way, in an unconfrontational way, to take Newfoundland through a huge and very serious challenge. And I want to note that, and I want to acknowledge it, and I want to applaud it, because I think that kind of approach is what we're going to need to ensure that we sustain the future of the offshore oil and gas industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. You know, my mind casts back to 40 years ago, I hate to say, when I was first elected to the Parliament of Canada in 1980. And shortly after I was elected, the Government of Canada brought in what was a controversial program, the National Energy Program. Parts of it caused great strife and great disquiet, no doubt, in Alberta and Western Canada. But an important part of it shouldn't be forgotten, because it had a profound impact on offshore Newfoundland and Labrador. And indeed, it led to an attempt to develop an offshore off Nova Scotia as well. And I'm talking about the Petroleum Incentive Program. It really was a series of incentives that attempted at the time to Canadianize the industry and stimulate the development of the industry at the same time. And it's interesting for all of us to remember that when we look out to the offshore, every single one of the producing wells offshore today were discovered during that 5 or 6 year window when the PIP program was operative in the early 1980s. Now, why is that important? Because it tells us that oil and gas offshore, it didn't get discovered by accident. It got discovered by design. And it got discovered because of incentives that really attracted capital, which is global in nature, to go at the cost of, in today's dollars, $100 million a well, and put a hole in the ground and to attempt to prove up significant and sizable reservoirs. My belief is when we look at what's happening with the combination of COVID-19, the global engine has, quite frankly, slowed down. It's on idle. It's nearly on stop on a global basis. This is unprecedented in the history of organized structures globally, that this should happen. There are attempts to restart the economy. People are beginning the first tentative steps to restart the global engine. But it's my belief, and I think it's a fair comment, that it's going to take some time before that happens. The combination of that engine slowing down, the requirement for fuel dramatically dropping, whether it's airplanes, whether it's buses, public transit, whether it's our personal cars, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's plants, processing facilities, the combination of that, coupled with what was an untimely and disastrous price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, has led to an unprecedented drop in the value of oil. And of course, we know the storage tanks globally are now near full, including the storage tanks accessible for Newfoundland and Labrador offshore. It seems to me, if there were ever a time for Canada to once again, and let's remember, we talk, as Newfoundlanders, we always talk about the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore. We've got to remind ourselves, this is the Canadian offshore. And we've got to remind ourselves that the major beneficiaries of the Canadian offshore are all Canadians, not just Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. But if there were ever a time for Canada to step back in and to ensure that this industry sustained, now is the time for a dedicated program to stimulate offshore exploration once again. You know, I've taken note of the fact that Norway, which has a stimulus program, which has ensured continued exploration in its offshore, and by doing so, ensured the future of the offshore activity there. Last year alone, drilled 57 wells. Newfoundland and Labrador in 30 years has drilled only 54 wells. They've seen more activity with a focused stimulus program in a single year than we've had in 3 decades. I think the facts speak for themselves. So I know that that Minister Reagan Seamus O'Regan is very cognizant of the huge demand, the huge cry for support and for the government of Canada to step up. And I'm sure he feels, and this is appropriately said in this context, himself between a rock and a hard place. And he feels the weight of 40,000 people on his shoulders. But I hope he understands, and I know he does. I know Seamus well. I regard him as a dear friend. I hope he understands that what he's hearing today and what he heard last week and what he'll hear every time he has a conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador is not a pile-on. It's not an attempt to bury more weight on his shoulders. It's actually an attempt to put wind in his wings so that he can speak with his colleagues, his fellow MPs, and with the senators, with force and with authority and with impact on behalf of all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as we talk about the need to sustain this critical industry. Let's not kid ourselves. With the collapse of the fishery in 1992, with the impact of COVID and what that's doing to our economy, with the terrible impact on the tourism industry, and that'll take some time to recover, with the fiscal and monetary state of the province. No point getting into how we got there. It's real. It's a huge challenge with the Bank of Canada. Our capacity as a province to go and borrow in the markets today, very constrained. With all of those things happening, we cannot sit and see both capital associated with the offshore oil and gas industry, people, real talent, world-class talent associated with the industry, and infrastructure, the kind of stuff that's behind Fred right now in the picture that I can see of Fred, whether it's drilling rigs or production platforms. We can't see those leave the province. If they leave, let's not kid ourselves, the challenge to get them back will be remarkably difficult. As was pointed out by Bill before I began to speak, I've chaired 3 large company boards on the TSX, in fact 4. I've been a CEO of several companies. Today I'm a vice chair of BMO Financial Group. I sit around many tables where capital decisions get made. One of the points I wanted to make today is these decisions get made quickly. In this COVID environment, where companies' first responsibility is to survive and sustain the equity value of their companies, protect their shareholders, their employees, and all of their stakeholders, they don't take long to make decisions. Look at Warren Buffett and his decision to exit all of his airline stocks in a very short period of time at a substantial loss to the value of his investment. Bam, decision made. One of the messages I wanted to leave today is that I have no doubt that boards, management teams who are present in the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore are pressed today to ensure that they are seeing a decent return on capital, that if they're going to commit to the longer term, they have to believe in the future, they have to believe they have real partners, or capital will flow elsewhere. So we need timely and quick and effective decisions. One other comment, I'm afraid I might be pushing my time, Mr. Chairman, but if I can, just a little longer. I think this is more than an issue for the federal government to resolve. I think there's a role for the provincial government. In 1996, when I became premier, we didn't have a generic offshore oil and gas regime. We were doing one-off negotiations. In fact, we finished in the first months I was in office the negotiation on Hibernia. And then we brought in a generic regime. That regime is what's in place today and drives the operation of the existing players in the offshore. There have been some tinkering with it, some changes to it, but fundamentally, it still exists. It's now 25 or approaching 25 years old. I think it's time for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador to look at that regime in the context of this challenge and to ask whether there ought to be changes to it, maybe even a moratorium on royalties for a period of time, all part and parcel of developing a package with the federal government to ensure that we sustain the players in the Newfoundland offshore now and into the future. And I'll stop right there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. You've covered a lot of ground there. Excellent insight. Touched on a number of really, really important points here in terms of the urgency, being in unprecedented times, and truly this is a Canadian story for certain. And I look forward to the panel Q&A and picking up on some of the important points that you've made. So thank you for that as your opening. Our next panelist, Charlene Johnson, is the CEO of Noia and served several senior portfolios in the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, including finance and president of Treasury Board, innovation, business and rural development, and environment and conservation. Charlene has a brief presentation to provide. Charlene, please.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome, everyone. Today I thought I would do a slideshow. We have many members on the line, but we also have a number of people from the general public. So the first couple of slides, I just want to talk about really quickly what is at stake. You'll see from this slide that oil and gas is a significant contributor to our economy. When oil was at peak production, GDP from oil and gas was consistently 1/3 of our total GDP. And even when production and price was down, it still accounted for 1/4 of our GDP. The question is, going forward, how do we replace that? In this next slide, you'll see that before oil and gas came into production, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we were 13% below the average weekly earnings compared to Canadian average weekly earnings. Hibernia comes on stream, oil and gas comes on stream, and in 2017, this is Stats Canada data, we are now 6% above the average weekly earnings. And it's a rising tide lifts all boats. That helped raise the incomes of many sectors of our economy. This is tens of thousands of families that we are talking about. I thought it's important to outline our asks. I know our members have heard at a very high level exploration and development incentives. So we have two proposals effectively, and CAP, the province, the Oil and Gas Corporation, and Noia, we're all aligned that what is needed to recover, to move forward, and to compete is exploration and development incentives. We are seeking a multi-well exploration incentive program with a graduated reimbursement of capital costs ranging from 30 to 70%. Multi-well, because the more wells you drill, the better the success rate. And that's on the exploration side. Simultaneously, we're also looking for an investment tax credit for development. Oil and gas companies could avail of it up until 2002, at which time the price of oil went high, and we're asking now to be able to avail of that again with a 15% tax incentive in the short term and 10% in the long term. Norway, as Brian had mentioned, announced exploration incentives way back in 2005, and you can see from this slide here what happened to seismic and what happened to production. And just last week, they announced development incentives as well. So they already had the gold standard when it came to exploration incentives. And now we are competing with Norway on development and exploration incentives. And there is talk that the UK and the United States are looking at incentives very soon as well. So we need to be in the game or we lose. Brian already mentioned this, so I'll just quickly go over it. 57 wells in Norway, 30, that's more than what we've done here in the last 30 years. When they brought in the incentive in 2005, the number of companies there doubled, and there were 17 discoveries last year alone. And of course, we know incentives work locally because, as was mentioned, PIP has led to the 4 fields we have today. So this slide here shows the economic benefit of drilling an exploration well. And you can see even with a dry well, One well creates 54 million in labor income in Canada, 37 million in Newfoundland and Labrador alone, 625 jobs with 370 of those in Newfoundland and Labrador. So the investment will be returned to the federal government in the way of corporate income tax, personal income tax, consumer spending. This is a short-term investment to help us through a period, and the returns will go back to the federal government in spades. The more wells you drill, the better the chance of success, and this is what success looks like. A discovery, an average discovery of about 800 million barrels leads to 4,400 annual jobs. Gross economic output for Canada, $2,650 million. Again, demonstrating that this is not a handout, this is a hand up, and the money will be returned. Now, that was on exploration incentives. Development incentives could help with Beta Nord, West White Rose, Terra Nova, Hibernia, the North Atlantic refinery closed. So I thought I would just pick one of those and show what a development incentive could mean. So with the 15% tax incentive, that would virtually equate to about $300 to $350 million of an investment from government. That on a deep water project that's roughly about $10 billion to construct, life of field, would lead to $3 to $3.5 billion in government revenue, $14 billion in GDP, and more than 10,000 person years of employment. Significant returns for the original investment of $300 million. That is what is at stake. This is what we have the potential to lose to another country's gain. This slide here, I thought, because we have many on the line from different sectors, this shows the economic impact from oil and gas throughout the whole economy, including induced impacts. The purple shows what it could be in 2033 with 2 more billion barrels of oil coming into production. So you see here recreational vehicles, restaurants, even pet supplies fare better when oil and gas activity is up. Now that was highlighting the economic benefits. I'd like to turn now to the environmental benefits of our offshore. And you see down at the bottom of the screen, the red circle, that is Hibernia. Several studies have shown that we are 30% below the greenhouse gas emissions, the world average. We are 0.23% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. Of the 10 million metric tons of greenhouse gases in Newfoundland and Labrador, less than 2 million of that comes from the offshore. We have light sweet crude, and it's a very attractive feature with our sophisticated supply chain, with the prospectivity, that combined with the incentives we are asking for, we are poised to seize the potential that we have here. We have light sweet crude, but we do have opportunities for even greener projects in our future. Here you see the Johan Sverdrup in Norway. It's powered by hydro from shore. We have hydro. It reduces emissions by 80 to 90%. So this can happen here with new discoveries too. You can see on the bar chart the significantly small percentage of an average platform. The next slide shows a picture of the first oil platform that was powered offshore from wind. I'm not sure if you can hear all the rattling in the background today here, but we have plenty of wind too. So we're blessed with natural resources. This is an opportunity for us as a province to be leaders, to have net zero by 2050. And that's just not an environmental plan, that's an economic plan to be competitive globally. So this isn't an investment, this isn't a cost, sorry, this is an investment. And we need immediate response from the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Very well articulated. I think what's really important here, just building as well from what Brian said, is, you know, what's really important here is that we're very clear on the asks related to the industry in terms of Noia, the operators, full alignment relative to what we need. Certainly, this industry, as you pointed out, we compete internationally. Capital is mobile. It'll go where it's welcome. So we have no other choice but to roll up our sleeves and put the effort into this, because the future looks fantastic, as you've clearly highlighted. And of course, the facts don't lie. So thank you for taking us through that. And I'm sure we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that as we get into the roundtable. I'd also like to say that under your leadership, you've been very effective in putting the spotlight on our industry and the challenges we face. I think, I'm not sure what the numbers are here today. There are probably over 1,000 people, and that's clearly evidence of the hard work of Noia, but it also sends a very strong message that our offshore oil and gas industry is in a very fragile state. So thank you for that. Our next panelist, Mark Tobin, is the founder and president of investment firm Cahill Capital. From 2006 to 2008, Mark chaired CHC Helicopter Corporation, then the world's largest helicopter company. Today, Mark is chair of Innovation and Business Investment Corporation, and he's also the co-chair of Business and Arts Newfoundland. Mark, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking to you today because Cahill Capital is an investor in Newfoundland and Labrador companies, mainly technology-based. The organizers of this event felt that this perspective would be helpful. I started my career with Sealand Helicopters in 1981, when the offshore oil and gas industry was just beginning here. There was no production then. 100% of the wells drilled were exploratory. The major international oil companies were drilling here because of, as Brian mentioned, the petroleum incentive program. Because of that program, we have an offshore industry here in Canada today. The financial returns of the investments have been excellent. Sealand Helicopters, for example, grew and transformed into CHC Helicopters. The spin-offs from having a Canadian domestic offshore industry are huge, and CHC is just one example of its economic impact. I remember when the PIP program ended, and overnight we went from 14 rigs on the east coast of Canada to 1. It was devastating to the nascent domestic service industry. Some, like CHC, expanded internationally to survive. Others didn't make it. Now, as you've heard over and over again, this time is different. The global industry is in contraction, and nations are taking steps to protect and promote their domestic industries. Replacing lost domestic work with international is not a viable option. That's why we have to support our domestic Canadian offshore industry to ensure it remains viable. It's just too important to our economy. Now, many of us are aware of the growing impact of our tech sector to our provincial economy. Many hundreds of high-quality well-paying jobs are created here every year, and each year that number increases. Some local companies, some tech companies, are actually hiring now despite the pandemic crisis. As much as I'm a believer and supporter of our tech sector, it's not on any planning horizon where it rises to close to the level of economic importance of our offshore industry. I can't overstate again how important it is to our regional and national economy. The economic benefits from the industry spill over and support other sectors like the tech sector and others that were in Charlene's presentation. There's an incredible multiplier effect at play here, and it pulls in large amounts of capital from outside of Canada. Capital that drives value and creates wealth and jobs. In recent years, governments have gotten much better at using incentives to drive outcomes. In the innovation ecosystem, government investments have been instrumental in supporting and celebrating the growth and economic benefit of the companies that existed. With both equity and non-dilutive financing, we are allowing our tech sector to compete and succeed globally. Canada recognized the tech sector's importance, and that is why support programs were developed and deployed in record time. I believe the same logic and approach should be applied to our offshore industry. Our low carbon oil is the best way to bridge society to a carbon-free future. Cahill Capital has invested in green technology companies, and I see no conflict with that and also supporting our offshore industry. Furthermore, in these times of growing nationalism and shortening supply chains, it makes no sense to me to imperil a key component of the Canadian economy. The government of Canada made one of the best investments it ever made when it supported the Hibernia development. I believe it's time for history to repeat itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You touched on a number of important themes there. Certainly regarding the low carbon and the green technology sector that you're supporting and investing in our province. The young entrepreneurs, the knowledge base there, that obviously we need to continue to ensure that transfers from the oil and gas industry as we move into the low carbon future. You also touched on, I think, which is really important, as Brian started off, about the National Energy Program and talking about self-sufficiency. And certainly there's an argument that should be made today that that is probably as important as it was back in 1980 when the NEP program was first introduced. So thank you for your comments, and also thank you for your commitment to investing in our province's young entrepreneurs and the high-tech startups. Our next panelist, Fred Cahill, is president of the Cahill Group, one of the largest multidisciplinary construction and fabrication companies in Atlantic Canada. Fred is the chair of the Genesis Center and the MUN Engineering and Applied Sciences Advisory Council, and serves as a director on numerous boards. Fred, please. You there, Fred?
I knew somebody had to do it, Bill, so it had to be me.
That's okay. Hey, that's a great picture in the background there. Fantastic.
Hopefully that distracted a few people for the second. So good day and thanks, Bill. Before I begin today, I would first like to take a moment to discuss safety in the wake of COVID-19. The presence of COVID-19 in our communities has collectively heightened our focus on safety. It is the norm today for letters and email messages to close with "stay safe." The measures we have taken to flatten the curve so far have been successful, and the actions we take as restrictions begin to ease will be taken with the same focus in mind: safety. We have hundreds of employees working from home and many teams still working on project sites across Canada. It's important to acknowledge we are all currently engaged in and will re-enter a work environment that is very different from the one they were in before COVID-19. This will not be without its challenges, but we've already shown that we can adapt and are up to whatever it takes to get this thing moving. Well, today I just wanted to explain, for those not familiar with our firm, the history of our group, our involvement with the oil and gas industry, what the oil and gas sector has enabled us to do as a company, the challenges we face, and the vision of the future. Our firm was established by my father in 1953 as an electrical contractor. In 1990, the offshore industry in Newfoundland was kickstarted by the Hibernia Development Project. Our firm, like many other local companies at the time, became involved with the project with the building of the bull arm fabrication facilities. We were very fortunate to continue on in the building of the permanent Hibernia gravity base and topside structure. In 1997, we were present on the platform supporting operations when first oil was brought on board. Through partnerships and new acquisitions, our group continued to support Hibernia operations for the next 20 years. During the years since that first oil was produced in our offshore, we've been involved in all phases of development of the subsequent 3 offshore assets: Suncor operated Terra Nova FPSO, Husky operated Sea Rose FPSO, and most recently, ExxonMobil operated Hebron GBS platform. So we've been there since the beginning and have seen Newfoundland's offshore grow from a single project to an industry that today represents over 30% of the province's GDP. Our firm and a number of other firms have leveraged our involvement in the oil and gas sector to expand and diversify our capabilities in other industries here in Newfoundland and across Canada. What started off from Cal's perspective as an electrical contractor in 1990 with a staff of 5 and a trade workforce of less than 50 has grown today to a group of companies and partnerships employing hundreds of staff and thousands of tradespeople that support energy projects across the country. Over the years, as the oil and gas industry grew and more offshore assets were put into production, the provincial supply chain grew to support the industry's growth. Local companies saw the need and opportunities that were presented. Cal evolved from being simply an electrical contractor to a multidisciplinary organization capable of offering everything from module fabrication, large-scale mechanical, piping and electrical construction, niche engineering, to operations support. Our client base also grew to include some of the largest organizations in the world, many of whom we continue to support. Over the years, we and the others in the industry have been able to attract talented employees, the majority of which have been local. Graduates of our trade school, technical colleges, and university. Thousands of post-secondary students benefited from work terms in the sector that evolved into careers into oil and gas. Quite a number have gone on to take on very senior roles in the operations and management of the operators organization, as well as in the engineering companies organization and large support companies throughout Canada and the world. The oil and gas industry has a strong commitment to diversity, safety, and quality, as well as local benefits. Newfoundland trades have benefited tremendously from this over the years. This has allowed us to grow and train thousands of our local trades men and women to be what I believe is some of the best skilled and most sought after trades in the country today. The oil and gas industry is always challenging itself to leverage technology and innovation to execute its CapEx and OpEx safer, more efficiently, and more environmentally friendly. Locally, we have benefited from this as our companies have broadened our technical capabilities with investments in infrastructure and technology. The research and development invested in this province as a direct result of the oil and gas industry has been huge. Infrastructure investment in the building of numerous university structures, such as including the Earth Science Building, the Core Science Building, the Hazardous Environment Research Facility, and the federal government's NRC research facility is tremendous. The introduction of the process engineering discipline and many more programs in our post-secondary schools all have come from the investment from the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry has also contributed significantly over the years to our community. Companies and organizations, including trade labor groups involved in the sector, have been able to give back to many worthwhile causes. Regional health foundations, community food sharing, Stella Circle, the YMCA, and the one close to my heart, the Gathering Place, and many, many more throughout the province in every region. Companies in the oil and gas industry have also been very, very avid supporters of the arts. A strong oil and gas industry creates and maintains a strong economy. This industry directly or indirectly touches every aspect of our community, including real estate, car dealerships, restaurants, etc. This has significant impact and has created a robust supply chain with tremendous, tremendous economic spin-off. I don't think I'm telling anybody here today something they don't already know. But it cannot ever be forgotten how this province and this country has benefited from the oil and gas industry, not only from the revenues it has generated, but the employment of long-term, good-paying jobs it has created, the growth that has resulted in the communities throughout the province, the technology it has enabled to be developed and leveraged elsewhere, and the strong safety culture it embodies has influenced other industries in the province and generally how we live. We are here for the long haul, but we need the right support and acknowledge now the significant impact these contributions have on our province and our country. Our collective investment in people, infrastructure, and communities will be compromised if we do not have a stable approach to their exploration, development, and the continuing support of our industry association at all levels of government. As an industry, with the COVID-19 pandemic and low, unstable oil prices, we are facing unprecedented levels of uncertainty. These uncertainties have led to limited pipeline of true projects, uncertain futures. Delays and deferrals and cancellation of projects such as Equinor's Beta Nord, Exxon's Hibernian West subsea extension, and most recently, the most devastating news of the week of the canceling of the Life Extension project for the FPSO behind me, of the Terra Nova FPSO, and the idling of this vessel for potentially 2 years. Devastating. Well, we all acknowledge that competition for investment is a global game, and we must play this game. We cannot afford to sit on our hands and let this investment go elsewhere. Newfoundland and Canada needs a vibrant and sustaining oil and gas industry. In the short term, we must focus on getting marginal and near-term shovel-ready projects back on track. We need to kickstart these projects now, either through tax incentives or other measures that can help reinvigorate development. Hibernia, Terra Nova, and White Rose all have meaningful projects that need to get moving while we all await Equinor's decision. Exploration incentives are also required. Long-term industry sustainability requires exploration. We need to accelerate these efforts through streamlined regulations and incentives. This vision is possible, and we are committed to making it happen. I appreciate the provincial and federal government's efforts made to date, but time is of the essence. We will need to be part of the solution, but let me be clear, as Charlene indicated earlier, the industry is looking for a handout, hand up, hand up, not a handout. I would like to thank Noia for inviting me to participate in the virtual town hall. I applaud their ability to gauge their member companies, many of whom normally compete for the same project opportunities, to bring a unified voice to the fierce challenges facing every one of us in the offshore oil and gas industry today. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred, for that very comprehensive and important perspective of our industry. I have to tell a personal story here of when you and I were much younger and had thicker mustaches, and were out running around Bull Arm, and I remember you showed up with I think it was a 20-foot trailer of electrical equipment, and you never looked back. You were up for the game, this new game called offshore oil in Hibernia. And under your leadership, Cal has become a great success, and employing thousands of people at peak and giving back to our community. And I think again, we sort of think about all of the panelists in their opening remarks here today. We talk about the fact that we're just getting started. But we need some help here to be able to incent the various programs to get drilling moving, to be able to ensure that the level of lifestyle that we enjoy in Canada and in Newfoundland and Labrador continues. And also, I guess, if you look at Cal in terms of what their investments in oil and gas have led to in terms of the ability to diversify into other industries and to expand, and also to give back to the community in terms of board positions and looking at community involvement, all those types of things. Really appreciate it, Fred. Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists for all of your insightful comments. We'll now open the virtual floor to questions. I remind attendees that questions can be submitted through the Zoom Q&A function, and you'll find the icon at the bottom of your screen. So no time to waste here, so let me begin. I do have a question, and that is for the Honorable Brian Tobin. Brian,
Bill, your voice is fading in and out. You're probably getting a little bit away. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay now?
We can, yeah.
Okay, good. So, Premier Tobin, a question many of our attendees likely have on their minds is, why was participating in this town hall today important to you? I know you touched on it in your opening remarks. It is important.
Well, the truth is, Bill, I have I think pretty successfully attempted to stay out of public policy comment and or debate for the last 18 years, been 18 years since I retired. And other than being involved in various charitable causes and fundraisers, you know, for the arts community in Newfoundland, for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, I really have not been a talking head on TV, been asked to do so many times, or I've not given speeches at party functions. I've really focused on my business life. And when Charlene called me and asked me to do this, my initial reaction was probably not. But I have to agree, I think, with your comment. She's very persuasive, and very passionate. And obviously, this is more than a job. This is about the future of the province. And it really did remind me that when any one of us who care deeply about Newfoundland and Labrador are asked to stand up and speak out, especially at a time like this, you really can't have the luxury of saying, no, you've got to be heard. You know, and the reality is, I believe with all of my heart that Newfoundland and Labrador has a good future, has a prosperous future. I mean, the basket of resources that we have as a province, from mining, from the forestry, from offshore oil and gas, from still the harvest from the sea, is considerable. And if we manage it well and manage it smart, there's much to look forward to in Newfoundland and Labrador. But I do fear that if we let despair get to us, or if we lose our voice, or if we're afraid to ask for something that's reasonable in a difficult circumstance like this, we can and will be left behind. You know, I just remind us all, Newfoundland and Labrador has not received equalization for the last 6 or 7 years, not a penny. Think about that. We pay in to the Canadian economic basket, and we've done so basically since oil and gas has really ramped up and become a significant part of the revenues of the province. We don't get any money out of equalization. Our next door neighbors in Quebec, about $12 billion last year. Our neighbors in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, about $2 billion each last year. And I don't quibble or quarrel with any of that. But I do say that when you think about that and the fact that we received in Newfoundland and Labrador zero, we shouldn't be shy or hesitant or nervous or timid about making the ask that's being made today, and that is that we find a way to stimulate exploration again in the offshore. And as Charlene pointed out to us, every penny that's poured into a well, and you got a 1 in 6 chance of being successful, comes back in economic benefits for Canada and for Newfoundland and Labrador. And if you actually find something that's sustainable, that can be prosecuted, that can be developed, I mean, the multiplier effect is extraordinary. So why am I participating? Because I just think that anybody who cares about the province, and everybody in Newfoundland and Labrador cares about the province, has to find their voice now.
Thanks very much. Mark, I want to turn to you now, and basically, I guess in terms of looking at your portfolio of investments and the current climate, I mean, how is the current climate impacting investments in this province? Are you making adjustments?
Yeah, we made obviously a lot of adjustments, and like everywhere else, we're focused on protecting the companies that we're already involved with. This means very careful application of our capital and our co-investors' capital, and we're also making sure that where and as appropriate, all the investee companies have full participation in the various government programs that are put in place, as I mentioned earlier, and it's key to their survival. Without them, I think the startup sector here would be decimated. So we're very grateful for those programs, and I don't know why we are hesitant to see similar type programs put in place for the offshore oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Charlene, question for you. You represent a very large membership here of pretty well close to 600 members. What's the biggest concern being expressed by you by Noia members during this crisis? And what does Noia feel is the best help that can be provided for our industry to recover and compete globally?
I think I'm hearing, mostly short-term concerns right now, but we are also turning to the medium and the long term. People are hurting. We have over 50% of our members have laid off significant numbers of people. We have companies that are closing, have zero revenue coming in, cannot pay rent. We are doing member check-ins now. Our staff is reaching out to all of our members just to see how things are going. Can we help on your membership? Do you need some extra time? And companies are telling us that they are closing shop and leaving Newfoundland and Labrador. And when they leave, they're never coming back. I'm hearing individuals who, are facing bankruptcy. They're not sure how they're going to be able to provide for their families in the future. We've been working around the clock, many people. This is really a Team NL effort. But I think the hardest question that I got was from my 11-year-old daughter. And she said, Mom, I don't want to have to leave here. All this you're talking about. And she's seeing and hearing us on the phone because they're home. And that's really the situation that we're in right now, is we need a future for Newfoundland and Labrador. So providing these two asks that I outlined today is not just saving an industry and helping an industry to be all that we can be. People talk about being like Norway. We can be better than Norway. We can be the best in the world with all of the resources. We're an energy warehouse. We have a sophisticated supply chain. We have the best rocks in the world. We just need a short-term assistance, and we promise we will pay it back in spades. And I said in my opening comments that we need to be visionary. We need to have a long-term view. And I think it's time our province, we all together show leadership to have net zero by 2050. As I said, this is it's not just an environmental idea. This is an economic idea and plan as well to be globally competitive. We just need help, and we need it yesterday.
Thank you. Fred, question for you. What are the biggest challenges companies such as yourselves are facing right now?
Well, I guess it's twofold. I guess first of all is the attraction and retainage of talent, and as this industry, it wanes, being able to keep and track the people has been very, very difficult. And the other thing is, I guess, from our, to be into this sector, there's a fair bit of investment in terms of bricks and mortar as well, and that's fine, but it's very, very difficult when we have the ups and downs of the industry where you make an investment and then you have your project and then there's no project, and then you have to gear back up again. And that this investment is sitting idle while the next project comes on. So you have to have that investment to be able to compete and be able to service the sector. So that cash outlay and that infrastructure investment, in a very sporadic industry, is very, very difficult for us and people like ourselves. And so going forward, this is, we need to try to again sustain consistent amount of exploration and amount of developments around here, so we can be able to keep that infrastructure busy. So, but that's the big thing that I find, that the talent and retaining for the talent during the down periods, as well as the infrastructure, and be able to have to invest in the infrastructure and be able to afford to keep that and maintain it while projects are not being pursued.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone talked about the number of wells that we in relation to what's been drilled in Norway, and it's difficult to get that critical mass if we've only, if most of the wells that we've drilled have been prior to 1998. It just takes a long time, to make those discoveries and go from discovery to development, and we have challenges even in terms of the regulation toward that to sort of shorten the cycle time. So I think critical mass is what you're pointing out is difficult to then be able to retain and move people from one project to the other. So thank you for that. Brian, I want to come back to you. I've stated a few times myself that I find that the politics of oil and gas in Canada is complicated. And I'd like for you to help the audience understand that we hear there's a concern within the federal government about supporting the oil and gas industry and how that may be received publicly. Do you think this is a valid concern?
I think it's a valid concern and a question that people should ask, whether money is being spent well or not being spent well, and we should never shy away from being able to answer that question in the Canadian offshore, the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore. Let's just remind ourselves that the government of Canada has a policy to move Canada toward a lower carbon economy, lower emission economy. And we are sitting on a global scale, if you compare the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore, the quality of this crude, light sweet crude, to what else is out there planet-wide, we're sitting on some of the lowest emission oil to be had anywhere in the world. So if it is a policy objective, and it is, to be a lower carbon emission economy in Canada, it makes perfect sense to want to be supportive of and sustain the development of the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore. I just noticed, Bill, that Charlene just dropped a comment that should cause my ears to perk up, and she made reference to being net zero by I think you said 2050. Is that what I heard? Does that represent today, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in on your toes as moderator, does that represent a new policy statement? We've got both the chairman and Charlene both here, Karen and Charlene both, a new policy statement and or position by Noia, and if it is, I think it's a very significant development and one that responds to the very issue that you just raised, the concern about, well, why invest in this sector? I think the sector is understanding that we're going through a transition of our economy. We see this oil as being transitional oil, and the sector itself is stepping up to a commitment to a lower carbon economy. So is that what I heard, or am I putting words in your mouth, Charlene?
No, our board of directors and myself as CEO, we are wholeheartedly in support of net zero by 2050. We should be developing our oil and gas sector while supporting and encouraging the use of renewable forms of energy. And the revenue from the offshore can also go further to help with innovation, like Mark was talking about. We have the skills and knowledge here. We have our employees are absolutely world class. We're all environmentalists. I'm an environmentalist. We want to protect our environment, and I want my daughter to have a good quality of life. So absolutely, it's something that our board wholeheartedly supports.
Mark, I'm going to come back to you a little bit about, again, talking about our youth here in the province and retaining our best and brightest. I know you work with a lot of young entrepreneurs and startups. Are you concerned about a loss of good people and innovation if our oil and gas industry continues in a prolonged slump?
I'm very concerned about that. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I started working in the industry in 1981. And we in this province are facing a demographic time bomb. The roots go back to 1981 because the economy was very weak when we all graduated, and everybody left, and not everybody came back. Now we have an aging population, so that further strains our tough fiscal position. So I'd hate to see anything happen that exacerbates that. The other thing is, if you look at the way the tech sector or the startup ecosystem works, it's reliant on two things that come from the rest of society. One is capital. Angel capital comes from a buoyant economy, and a lot of the companies that we've invested in and have seen grown and create employment have come with mentors and capital that was generated within the oil and gas industry. So I think it's very important.
Thank you. Fred, I've got a question, and I guess at maybe the risk of repeating ourselves, but some things bear repeating given the importance of this. But You've been involved with the industry for a long time and have seen many different ups and downs. I mean, how does this current circumstance today compare with other challenging periods the industry has faced? What are your thoughts in that regard?
Bill, I think it's fair to say it's unprecedented. We've never seen such a situation that we're in at this present moment. I mean, I said we've gone through a lot over the years. We've you mentioned earlier on, I guess in your previous speech, in the when Hibernia started, and then 2 years into it, the Gulf Canada pulled out, and everybody was devastated. We saw the collapse in 2009 in the economy, and the oil and gas tanked, and but it was a very short-lived, and we grew out of it again. And then in 2014, and the price of oil dropped again, and again we felt the impact of that, but nothing as severe as what we're seeing right now. And with the low oil prices and the COVID-19 and the state of our economy, it's pretty tough times right now, and it's got us all very fearful, I guess, and have been able to maintain our infrastructure, or the employment level that their companies have. And the big thing is, Bill, is that we're just listening to what Mark was saying. We've invested in this province, in our university post-secondary institutes. We've been able to produce some I really have to say the top engineers, within the industry here in the province. We train tradespeople in the same way. It's just, it really makes me, concerned and sad. I mean, that there's potential of have to lose these people, but they're going to have to go elsewhere to get work, or to be able to get, to keep the families going. So it's unprecedented what we've seen. And, as I said, we really can't be waiting, and sitting on our hands for the next year trying to figure out what we're going to do. We have to do it right now. And otherwise, as Brian said, or this capital is going to go elsewhere to other countries, and will we get it back? Who knows? And but so it's unprecedented, I feel.
Thanks for that. And it kind of you've sort of given me a sense of urgency around how critical and in terms of timing here. And I guess that probably want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the process, what's happening right now. And maybe I'm going to ask Charlene to weigh in on this one. But Charlene, how are discussions going with the federal and provincial governments? I mean, where are we? I mean, it was over 2 weeks ago. We had a first town hall here. We've had that wonderful hashtag My Offshore My Future. There's a lot of data out there. Where are we? What's the status with discussions with the federal and provincial government?
Discussions are ongoing. They have been ongoing for 8 weeks now. But I have to say, I don't want to put words into Minister O'Regan's mouth, but I do believe he is 100% all in on this. I do believe he is determined to deliver. I also understand, and I know Brian would understand this, that this is about convincing your cabinet colleagues as well. I remember back in 2014 when I was finance minister, and I wanted all-day kindergarten brought in so bad it hurt. I had to start with my leader, and then I had to make my way around the table and get their support. And because it was difficult, because it's a long-term benefit, all of the positive outcomes are later in life. So this one, we're asking for incentives now, and that long-term benefit will definitely come later. So this is meant to help him. Our awareness campaign is meant to talk about the value of this industry, the far-reaching impact of this industry. He is always only a text or a phone call away. His staff have been phenomenal. Special shout out to Paul Moen, who's analyzed this to death, asked vital questions. And as I said earlier, this is really a Team NL approach. This is not just Noia, CAP, Oil and Gas Co., the province. I was on the phone with the Premier 10 o'clock last night, again, before 8 o'clock this morning. Actually, I had to say, Premier, I got to call you back. I'm going on CBC. Everybody's in this together. This is a Team NL approach. We just need it to be a Team Canada approach now.
Good, good. So that's a nice segue. Brian, I've got a question for you. You talked about, and we're very clear that this is about Canadian energy. So I want to pick up on that. And as you know, we don't view the current situation as just a Newfoundland and Labrador issue. Fair point. So I want to ask you, do you have suggestions on how we can put more of a national spotlight on the issues facing our offshore and the impacts it will have, countrywide? What else can we do?
I actually think a very good job is being done. I've had a chance to speak to Minister O'Regan, to Seamus. Let's just remind ourselves that the PIT program that we're talking about was put in place under Prime Minister Trudeau the first. And that's when it occurred. It was a McKechnie budget, and it was designed specifically to stimulate the East Coast, both Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, or anywhere else for that matter, offshore. That's where it began. It worked, and it started the offshore, and then the program was brought to a close some years later. I think there's a powerful case to be made to Justin Trudeau that a program that began under his father and proved to be effective, is effective in Norway, as it was laid out in the presentation that Charlene did, needs to be revitalized. I think, frankly, we are fortunate for us, maybe not fortunate for Seamus, that we have him in cabinet today, and in particular in this portfolio today. Can you imagine the burden that he is feeling? It's a terrific burden, but the fact is, I think it's very well understood that he has an ability to speak to the Prime Minister in a way that's quite effective. And so I think everything we're doing, Bill, the constructive way in which it's being done is important. Nobody's out to try and, we're not out to try and just make a point or make the case or spill blood or be angry. We're out to get something done and understand well that the best way we can do that is to help the minister speak with a strong voice. Frankly, same with the province, whether it's Minister Cody or the Premier. I know they are working in a collaborative way. I've gone a little far in suggesting they should be looking at the royalty regime as well, but I do think that it at least should be looked at, because I don't think the royalty payout for the province this year is going to be that big. It was over $1 billion. What's it going to be this year? Pick a number. It's going to be way down below what it was. And is it worth what we're pulling out of it if we can turn that program around as well and use that as part of a stimulus, federal provincial stimulus package? Team Canada going to work to make sure that the Newfoundland and Labrador, as I like to say, the Canadian offshore is sustained. So no, at this stage, I can't believe, very good point, that Fred made. Decisions of this order of magnitude get made quick around corporate board tables. You talk about the FPSO behind you. If it's offshore and it's not producing oil, then it's not a profit center, it's a cost center. And we all know what happens when you have cost centers. The mothership just reported their quarter, Suncor. They had a very substantial quarterly loss. I mean, this is true. You can multiply that across every one of the service providers in the oil and gas industry. So if we're going to do something, we have to do it quick. If we wait another month or 2 or 3, it may all be academic. Capital will flow elsewhere, where it gets a better return, a more certain set of circumstances and rules, and we will have a devil's time bringing the industry back to Newfoundland. So I think Seamus knows that, and I think Premier Ball knows that, and I believe that when the case is made, the Prime Minister will understand that.
Good, thank you. Mark, and of course, time is of the essence. Capital is mobile. It'll go where it's welcome. Decisions are being made. They're being made quickly. I think we have a crisis of consensus that our minister, the government, is working hard on this file. But how great of an economic impact do you think there will be if the offshore loses out on investment to jurisdictions as Norway or the UK, if they offer fiscal relief, which they have, and Canada does not? I mean, how significant is this going to be?
Well, obviously I'm not an economist, but if you lose your competitive edge on an industry that's globally competitive and it's currently contributing around 30% to your economy, that's going to impart pain on the society of Newfoundland that will be felt for generations. I talked about the demographic bomb earlier. And I don't know how we plug that hole. So, you know, what happens to our tax base? What happens to our ability to fund our institutions and our healthcare? I don't know how we can deliver what the standard of living that Newfoundland and Labradorians have been accustomed to with such damage being done to our economy. And then if the supply of offshore or any kind of petroleum moves away from Newfoundland and Labrador, where does it come from when our industries elsewhere and here in the province recover and the demand comes back? Now Canada becomes a net importer of oil. At what price? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. Fred, I'll ask you to maybe start with this one. We are receiving a lot of questions about job losses and the substantial number that have occurred in the last few months. And Karen mentioned in her opening remarks, thousands of families are impacted. People are concerned that they will not be returning to their jobs. What are your thoughts in terms of how we best support our companies to get our people back to work?
Well, yeah, I think the federal government right now has, introduced a lot of initiatives, I think, to help us from that perspective. But if you put the COVID-19 crisis aside, if you can, and look at the from the offshore, the oil and gas sector, I mean, all I go back to is what I said again. I mean, there are some low-hanging fruit that shovel-ready projects that I think we can get moving right away. The one behind me is an immediate example of that. And if that project, if we could restart the extension of life of the Terra Nova FPSO, I mean, there's thousands of months of jobs that could be possibly generated from that immediately, as well as preventing the loss of permanent jobs. So that, I mean, that's just one, obviously. But I mean, there's engineering support that goes with that. I mean, as you know, on the Equinor project, if we're able to get moving on that one and get a decision, I mean, there's engineering, immediate engineering jobs that would be kick-started on that one. And the same thing I would think to you on the Hibernia West project. Again, I'm looking at it from the outside in. Obviously, nothing.
Yep.
But again, I mean, those projects, if we were able to get the green light on those at this point in time, even in a staged approach on the thing, at least, I mean, you'll be able to get the engineering and the supply chain moving again on it, and give them, I think, will give some hope to what's going on. And he said, we're going to come out of this COVID in the next few months, and but I'm fearful that because of what we're seeing in the cancellation, people, again, as Brian said the other day, I mean, there's over 2 million unemployed Canadians right now. And, will all those people be hired back? And I would say the same thing down here. My big fear is that, you've got engineering companies and construction companies who kind of who trim down temporary layoffs. But now we know when we come back out of this, will those people be brought back on stream? And I think if we're in the situation we are with these 3 or 4 projects we talked about, we're going to get a rude awakening. I hate to say it, and so how do we prepare against that? I guess just encourage that. I guess the sector, along with the federal and provincial governments, to see if we can somehow incentivize these guys to move forward with these projects. And that's all I really can say.
Oh, very good. Thanks, thanks, Fred. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Charlene?
No, I think Fred said it best.
Good. So, it does sort of you kind of put a lot of these things in sort of three buckets. Shovel-ready kind of projects that we need some kind of a development incentive. Securing the future, which is really all about our exploration drilling, and of course we've talked about the net zero, which is really all about our social license and having sustainable solutions going forward. So we've touched on some really important and key elements of why we're here today and why it's so critical and urgent that something is done. We're getting close to the end of our sessions. I think I need to do just a quick survey here of other questions, perhaps.
Good, Bill. If I could, sometimes
Yeah,
you can start listing people, but I do not want to forget Minister Cody and her staff and how hard they've worked with Noia and others on this as well. And I guess I just want to part with a final comment. I firmly believe that this isn't an either or scenario. This is all forms of energy working together. Wind energy, solar, hydro, it all requires petroleum products. So this is about energy and the environment, and being a leader requires someone following. Trying to transition from a market that somebody else will readily fill at your expense is not leadership. By making decisions that keep our oil and gas in the ground, we just give that production to Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, so others can gain the economic benefit and probably the environmental loss because of our light sweet crude, depending on where it gets produced. And what does that leave us with? It leaves us with the option to buy their production to support our daily needs. So we need to be visionary on that.
Charlene, I think you had the final comment in the panel. So on that note, I'm going to bring an end to our session. It's time to wrap up, and I do have some concluding remarks. First of all, a sincere and I would say a thunderous virtual applause to today's panel. You laid it all out there. Each and every one of you was energetic, insightful, provocative, as it should be. Passionate, fact-based, and it was personal. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time to have your voices heard. To our audience, and I don't know what the numbers are we over 1,000?
We are at 610 now, but we were close to 800 at one point.
Okay. So to our audience today, wow, you showed up in spades today, and your questions were very relevant. Thank you for that. I'd like to also say to our elected members and government officials that joined us today, you've heard from the panelists and the audience who care for this industry and are gravely concerned for its future. We came together again today, and I guess we'd probably do it again if we had to. I hope we don't, but we would if we had to help you tell our story, because as we've said before, our story is far from over. It is more relevant today than ever before. Thank you for attending. I have to say, having listened to the panel as a moderator, I have to tell you that I felt a slight twinge today. I don't know if it's a frustration or whatever it is, but I think most of us believe that we have such a bright future for our industry. But here we are today. It's an industry that's been so transformative to our province, and its contribution to Newfoundland and Canada significant on so many throughout every facet of our society. And as it was stated earlier, we have what the world needs as it transitions to a low carbon future. So for the avoidance of doubt and to restate, what is our ask? What is our need? A fiscal stimulus, not a handout, from the federal government to drive exploration and get development projects moving. It's an immediate and urgent action that's required to help our industry and Noia members survive this challenging time. I want to thank everyone today for your attendance, and please stay safe.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I came to Gander in 1959 with my husband, who came to teach Latin, believe it or not, in the high school. And I came to teach grade 6. I spent half my life on the farm, which is a place called Wall Cove, which is halfway between Morton's Harbour and Tizard's Harbour. It didn't give us any amount of money, and I mean cash. We had a good living, like we had cows and pigs and a couple of horses. One horse was used for work, the other two were ponies that belonged to my brother and I. There was little money to be had. It sort of came through osmosis. I saw it, all the time. My mother working in the garden, my father, he learnt, and my mother learnt from my grandfather how they planted the potatoes. So they would keep the seed, and when they would dig them in the fall, the potatoes, they'd be sorted. And the nicest little potatoes that would be about that size, with nice shapes and a number of eyes, I need one of the potatoes. So about this size, they would keep them, or a little smaller, but not too small, not like half of that. Make sure it's solid, not soft, because that would, or wrinkled, like this fellow's skin, because he's old, he's over, this one is past his time. And you look at them. And of course, as time went on, and a number of times you did this, you knew, you could look at them. And my grandfather would look down without a glass, and without any glasses, he could see how many eyes. So these indentations that you see here are eyes. And you need, the rule is you need at least two. At least two. Because one may not, but I sometimes look for 3 or 4. And they will sprout new. This is what they will sprout, and that's a different colored potato. So these will be kept, faithfully kept, in a root cellar and carefully looked after that the rats didn't eat them, because that was their food for next year. Now, there's an area of thought today, and I've been told this, that you don't do it because it weakens the stock. Well, I am using the same seed out there in my little potato patch, the same seed that I brought with me to Gander in 1964. So personally, from my personal experience, it does not weaken the seed. This is my potato that I'm going to plant, and you can see that, as I talked about before, we have 3 eyes. 1, 2, 3. So now I'm going to cut it in 2, and I'll make 2 seeds from this plant. But just to be on the safe side, I'm not going to plant that one, because why? It only has 1. So I would dig my trusty hole in the ground about 3 to 4 inches deep, and some fertilizer. You could use commercial fertilizer, or you could use manure or kelp. So you plant it in, eyes up, cover them up, and leave them be. 3 weeks later, you will see those little eyes come through the ground. And that'll be your potato for next year. This one goes into your compost to be recycled into soil. And they can almost grow anywhere. I have a compost in which my scraps, potato scraps, will go in, the peelings will go into it. And I've actually seen potatoes growing in my compost. They're actually growing with stalks that high, just from a potato peeling. So they're pretty resilient. When I started to do seriously, it was 1979. We bought a house in Eastport, and it had a half-acre of land with it. And I love to garden, I must say. I love to grow flowers, and I love to see things grow. My husband made a bin in which he insulated it and lined it with cardboard, and that's where I keep my potatoes. And when it gets really, really cold out, I have a light bulb, And a 60-watt light bulb will keep it just at the temperature because they need to be kept at just below freezing. Otherwise, they become seed too early, and you don't want them to become seed until at least May, because you can't plant in Newfoundland till June. If you've got a back lawn, dig up a small square like 24 by 24. That's inches. I don't deal in centimeters before my time. And try potatoes because they're easy to grow. You won't have to buy your seed because you don't have the advantage of that. Or maybe you might find some old biddy like me who will give you their seed, that they had. And try it and see what you think of them. And start there and see if you like, number one, what comes out of it. If you get some pleasure out of doing it, and it also provides you with a lot of exercise. That would be my tip to younger people starting. And I think we're on a very slippery slope here of processed food. We've got the highest rates of diabetes of any province in Canada. We've got the highest rates of obesity. And we're killing ourselves. So I really think that's a message that even if you did it on a little scale, it takes a bit of elbow grease. And it takes exercise. But if you enjoy it, not everybody will enjoy it, but there'll be some. And I think the quicker the better.
The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for free. Visit RogersAnyplaceTV.com.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Join me, Chris Ballard, the voice of the Newfoundland Growlers, on Rogers TV Saturdays at 9 p.m. for the Growler Hour.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's your boy DC, and I am the Thursday night host of St. John's local tradition, Out of the Fog. You know, local matters